Welcome, Stephen Rock.
Hey, Alan, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah,
thanks
for
for coming.
Likewise, yeah.
You brought one of your cool, colorful, beautiful paintings with you.
I did. Brought a piece that was a proof print that I did some work on, but I love this piece and I thought it was interesting if it was a piece in work in progress that showed a little bit of something other than the mechanical side of digital imaging and output. Because the process is important, but the hand of the artist is, to me, equally as important, if not more. And letting the machine have its final say isn't what I want. I want my marks to still pull it out of that, I don't know, the rigidity of what some images feel like when they're still purely digital. But this has evolved in a number of ways from a purely computer-based approach to what I was trying to say. Gosh, that's probably probably 8 years ago now. Joseph Roberts invited me to do a show through Coca up at the Shilshol venue that he had up there. And I was starting to do some strip pieces of digital imaging, and I liked it because it was that whole matrix kind of streaming metaphor, and parsing up images and making them into the segments, kind of the way we consume our digital media, click. Oh, I'm not interested, click. I'm not interested, click. Oh, I'll look, but I'll scroll. And this fast consumption, this segments of what we're being fed. And that was really satisfying because it was that fresh point of a medium where, wow, the tools were new, the output was still, people hadn't seen some of this stuff. But I literally was at my computer because, as you know, I've got my print studio and I do digital prints for clients and associates, organizations, whoever needs some fine art printing. And I'm 24/7 focused, it's in our dining room, so I get up in the morning and there's the studio. I go to bed at night and I turn off the studio. And it started there was no escape. And then pile onto the work engagement with the medium, and then the absolute tsunami of political and social and global news that we get through our social media and through the computer as a medium. And I was literally looking at my monitors, and I turned this way and there's a window looking out on our yard. And it dawned on me, and an early piece was titled 30 Degrees Between Chaos and Beauty. And I realized, oh, it's kind of a choice. I can be focused on this or not. Turn your head that far and all of a sudden you got a different view. And as a metaphor, that started to open things up where I don't have to beat people over the head with the literal reference to the data, to the bits and bytes, and all my work was even referential at that moment to the new vocabulary and the new landscape. But once I started to realize that what I really want to focus on is how to participate in that because I like to be engaged. I get the newspaper, I listen to the news, the radio, I consume it however it feels satisfying to me, to my end. But I love gardening too, and I love beauty, and I'm not afraid of beauty in the 21st century as an artist, aesthetics, but still you want a little bit of something going on. So I did some pieces where I would take, I've got a piece called The Truth About Democracy, and it's explosive flag reference, document reference piece that all the elements, it doesn't look like text necessarily, but all those elements, all those graphic shapes came out of an article that was on drones, US drones bombing in the Middle East. And you taking the text feeds and putting them in, and then stretching them and doing the things we do in Photoshop and on the computer, and parsing them up, and pretty soon, 3 or 4 years later, I've really taken those pieces, those sheets of, like a piece this big in virtual dimension of text that I've created and overlaid. Well, you degrade it and you pull it apart. Years later, you're just working with the little pieces. But that's what I like, is that I've found this voice where I can take the photos of my flowers in the garden. I can put the energy in that I like to inject, because I want it to be a spontaneous medium. I don't want it to be overly engineered, or as I said earlier, I don't want the computer and the printer to have the last say. So can I energetically, kind of like a Pollock or Joan Mitchell or something, where you're the monkey in the cage. You just, God damn, my emotions, I'm going to put them down. And it's tough in a pixel by pixel controlled world to let it go and to keep throwing without it turning into just garbage or cliches, But I like that I still, part of my intention is that 30 degrees of separation. Doesn't say to ignore 30 degrees away as reality. It's kind of keep that tennis court going, the beauty and the chaos, so that you're right in the head when you step out into the world and you're not caught off guard, or you're not poignant with what you're trying to articulate.
So walk us through the process of how you get to these complex images.
I'll kind of wrap it back to when I got involved with it. There was nobody in town doing fine art printing. And I was taking 35 millimeter shots of my computer monitor and going to the 1 hour photo and getting 4x6s back that looked horrible. And you saw the refresh lines and everything. And I'm going, come on. But it was the only game in town. And I finally found a place downtown, and I eventually was hired because I was one of the few people that wanted to help evolve this into a... They were charging for fine art prints. They weren't doing fine art printing. No offense. Nobody knew what to do. The industry wasn't mature. The consumer, the artist, the creative wasn't on top of file preparation and delivery. The scale was limited by our ability to store and transfer things. I mean, everything wasn't in place yet, but they had machines and could hang out a fine art shingle and charge a premium. But so I eventually ended up working with them to establish a fine art department, and we had just top artists and creatives in Seattle. I was able to invite them in and say, we're trying to build this medium and let's see where it goes. But I've been doing this since I was a kid. My dad was an art teacher, and I like the smell and the feel and the tactile and the eye-hand coordination. I am not this guy at a keyboard, So I would go home at night, and we would decal down prints for artists to give the deckled edges. These ones I trim down and mount on board and then sand the edges. I would have these beautiful scraps of arches in Somerset and BFK Reeves. You know, if you were buying it at a store, that's not garbage. So I asked the owner, I said, I don't want to get busted for taking paper out the back door, but this is going into the dumpster. Just, if you don't mind, I'm going to take it home. He goes, you're right, it'll end up in the dumpster. So I'd go home and I'd decal down a little piece, and every night I would do a page from my diary, a pencil drawing. And so it's similar to not having a cell phone, I think, Alan. You know, you're doing it all day long, and the last thing you want to do is go home and get on the computer. So I'd go home, shut things down, and just draw for 2 or 3 hours at night and end up with a page from the diary. Well, I come back around to this, your question, what's the process? And I've tried to hone a voice that the medium isn't my voice, the process isn't my voice, but those are the vehicle to get my voice out. So how do I develop within this new rigid medium my voice? And I love to start with a blank page. Some people engineer it. Some people, I saw Jeff, he sketches it, he lays it out, he executes it. Chris, some of the other people you've been interviewing have a palette that they perfect before they do the final piece. And I kind of let the building of the image take me where it needs to go. But I found through that art director job, I got to work with the Library of Congress, and we were digitizing their collection, and it was at the beginning of all this, and the National Digital Library was trying to figure out processes and capture, processing, storage, and then dissemination of the riches of the library. And so they were wanting to get these captures and compress them so that instead of you having to travel to Washington, D.C., check in through a guarded door, put on white gloves, and wait for some guy to carry out a box so that you could look at something, you can now go to the library, to loc.gov, and dial up most of their collection, and you can zoom in and you can look at fibers on the papers. I mean, it's insane what's happened in 20 years. But part of that was that I was engaged with the collections because we were trying to figure out what would get bumped up to the front of the line to get people excited about this new access to the library. So it's got to be visually exciting, it's got to be sexy and intriguing. Well, the maps and rare documents was the sexy part of the library. So we got involved with the Geography and Maps division, and while I was doing that, I got insight into the collections and come back to the present day, and I found that they don't just do the maps, they do the blank pages in an atlas. They don't just do the text and the etching plates, they do the blank pages. That's archiving. Every page gets scanned. The front of the book, the back of the book, the atlas, anything. And there are these wonderful blank pages that have been stained and voxed and destroyed, and so I've been saving gigabytes of blank pages. And then when you overlay them, all of a sudden you get suggestions of landscapes and mountains and atmosphere. And I look at it akin to the ground of a plate, the atmosphere that you can pull in and out of something. And this is a vehicle without me doing fills and to be, go out and try and capture, distressed concrete stuff. I still do that stuff, but I found it really fits what I want as a mood and as a stepping off point for the blank page, that these just dirty old stained documents give me that suggestion, and from there I can take off. In this case, this is what I wrote it down because I can't remember all my titles. Tales of the Great Migration. And growing up in Eastern Washington, that's what this started to remind me of. You know, the big open plains of the Palouse and the barren mountains of Kittitas Valley where I grew up. So you've got this connection and you're looking for, why am I attracted to this? And then the great Tales of the Great Migration, I think it's a little bit of this whole conversation. How is art moving through, throwing everything that came before out, except for our voices, except for our visuals, except for, you know, you can't. You gotta migrate, you gotta evolve. So I'm trying to evolve my own language. I mean, I've been doing this for 26, 27 years, this medium, but I keep looking for that way to keep it organic, keep it spontaneous, allow that process to guide me. I didn't go to school to be an engineer. You know, I'm self-taught artist. I know what I know, and the best thing I know is me. I'll digress again if you want. I got a residency at the Morris Graves Foundation in Loletta at his lake for 10 days, a solo residency, and you get Morris's studio and 100 acres of redwood forest in the lake and his archives. I was free to go and get books and writings and things and take them back to the studio. Actually stayed in Morris's studio. And at night, I would often sit on the dock with the caretaker, Robert Yarber, who Morris left the estate to him and his wife, and they take care of it, and they very sensitive to the artists that they choose to stay there. But he was telling me a story of him and Morris walking through the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, and that Morris, being the character that those of us who know Northwest mythology know he was quite a character, but they were walking down and he stops in front of a window, looks at it and goes, "Morris Graves, huh? Perfect, don't stop. You're doing it just right." And Robert was sharing that with me because when you're by yourself, no radio, you're isolated in the quiet, in a Zen kind of environment with this mystic cloud permeating the whole experience. You question what you're doing, who you are, and where you're going to go. And it was reassuring that this guy's seen it all, and he saw Morris for who he was, another human mortal being. He says, "You're doing it perfect, Steve. Just be you." And it loosens things up, Anyway, I digress.
That's a nice story.
Yeah.
So, but you haven't walked us through how. So is it you're coy about that?
It's a long path.
Circuitous route, right? So is it originally a photography image that's put through Photoshop? Tell us how. Divulge your secrets.
Well, they wouldn't be secrets anymore. There are no secrets, man. Nicole will tell you I give freely of my information, but because it's a digital world, I don't need to scan things anymore per se. So I take photographs and I bring them into the computer, and I set up a page, if you will. And then I start building the image, whether it's from the background first or elements that I know I'm going to want to pull in there. And oftentimes I expand it because the proportions, it's just not what I thought. So I've had, 24-inch square pieces end up being 40 by 60 because this needs to be wider, this needs to be taller, this needs to go left, so that's the beauty of the computer. You can change your canvas like no other medium, This is going bigger, this is going, you're rotating it. But, so I build my image, and one that I just showed out at Jeffrey Moose's gallery, and it's sold immediately. It's funny about sales. I'd really like to share that with more people, but it's sold right away. So here it is, ferreted away in somebody's house. I'm grateful that it's sold, I'm happy. But you do realize that you're doing it to give it life, not to have it cloistered away. But that piece, I spent most of the pandemic working on it. So it was just, I'm thinking, God damn, that's, I really like this piece, and if it doesn't sell, this is going on the living room wall. But you don't know. My background with knowing the imaging part at this point, I've been doing it honestly about as long as anybody in the Northwest. They're big firms and big resources and fancy equipment, but I've been in the trenches with artists figuring out how to get their wide range of skills and abilities and qualities into this medium and help them find a voice in a digital medium, or reproductions, or photos that want to go on a different surface, or like you mentioned, canvas to play with. Part of what I find I need for my work, because I am focused as a business to get your work the way you want it, and usually that's getting a nice print in here. Alan, here is your print without boogers and scratches and dings and spits, and but my work, I will print it out, and then I'll take, as you see the marks. I like watercolor because it's a aqueous-based pigmented inks that I use, and the papers are optimized for inkjet. So when your brush hits with a viscous medium, it bonds and it immediately dries. So it doesn't do a wash and move it around. Each mark has edges and memory. And it's a layering process to build up the vibrancy. But I like that with the watercolors because I can very slowly go in and build the depth. So I abandoned using like drop shadows and stuff, because everything's at the same depth, everything's at the same value, everything is a hard mimic of the shape. But if you're painting it, you can give it contour, can wrap around other shapes and give it more depth. And when I started to do that, then it moves away from the device having the final say, if that makes sense. So I love painting on them after I've printed them, just to...
Now, why does the device doesn't have the say? Because of why?
Well, to me, a print can be beautiful on its own, but it still has the presence of a print. This moves back into a painting, if that makes sense. Because it's not just pixels going on paper through a device, but that now is a template for me to fine tune what I see and what I want to say. And
But it is a one-pass deal, right? You're not
the printer.
you're not adding on layers, right? You don't print it and then print it again. And
No, that
No.
just turns into mud.
it just turns out, so it's really
amazing.
fresh. I love that, but I'm trying to understand why then is it painterly or building?
Just to me, visually, it steps out of that. It gives it a more organic final touch. You know, it's going into any medium, and you just fuss with
Because
little
of the
things.
multiplicity and the richness? Is that why?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got another medium, and actually on this one, I've experimented with little collage pieces on here, and I do that in some of the work. The most recent stuff, I'm not really.
That's
put
over
collage-
the print?
Correct. And then if this was going to be mounted, I would then varnish it, which is a very Zen moment. You go, okay, I've created it, I've spent the time and the money on printing it, and I've done my painting. Now I got one chance to do a good coating. And you know about coatings, they have a way of going south or doing things unexpected. So I quiet myself and I do roll on the UV protective coating, and that does another thing to it. That absorbs into the paper, and it kind of unifies all the different things that you've done to the surface. And like your stuff, you put those coats on top, and everything just pops a little bit more, and it gives the impression of depth and light, and I like that. After that, I then have to let it dry and then back roll it carefully, and I build my boards and coat them with acrylic gel as a adhesive medium, and then just very patiently, very meticulously mount it, rolling it down the table.
So you mount it on a firm substrate, a wood panel?
Correct, yeah.
So it has a real flatness and...
Yes, and it's interesting. I've gone through a whole bunch of iterations of learning how to do that. For one thing, coating it before I mount it is important because it's given a rigidity to the print. If you don't mount it, you put it on, and the absorption of the paper will create a lot of bubbles and burps, and if it's a big print, you can't keep up with trying to move the air out, and so if I coat it first, I've got a nice.
You coat the front and the back?
Just the front, so that the back
can
actually
grab on.
Yeah, and the acrylic bonding with the papers, it does it kind of slicks it into the wood really nice, and I just love. I've grown to love this as a medium and a process, but it's taken me 20-some years. And
well,
everybody's got
gorgeous.
different ones.
I mean, the color. Are these little kind of reflective things collaged on top?
Correct. Yeah. And those are cut up other digital prints. And I think there's a little bit of gouache and ink in there. I mean, it's an experimental sheet at this point.
Love it. It's just really cool. And it has kind of, would you say it has sort of maybe an Asian kind of quality aesthetic to it?
I don't think you can deny it, whether it was intentional or not. Yeah, plum blossoms or peach blossoms or whatever, cherry blossoms going through the air.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, especially because it almost has a gold-like background and almost like with those shoji screens or...
Yeah, and growing up in the Northwest, my father, I mentioned he was an art teacher, and we'd come over to Seattle from Ellensburg, and we'd go to Foster White, we'd go up to the Fry Museum, we'd go down to Pioneer Square and see the galleries, and you got exposed to the Northwest sensibility, and that comes from the East a lot. So a lot of that aesthetic seeps in. And I think that was part of what I pulled out of the residency at the Graves estate too, is he was very into an Eastern aesthetic and a mindset, and I embraced that as a quieting of my creative spirit and the angst of worrying about your career, because in the arts it's constant. And I got stories, Alan, of another cool thing that I found down there was this letter back and forth, some correspondence with a dealer in New York. And they were writing him and saying, "We need more of your birds, your lovely, quirky little birds," you know. And he literally wrote back and said, you know, I'm paraphrasing, he said, "Suck it, man, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm doing little flowers. So you can have the flowers or nothing. What do you want?" Because he just got, and that's where we are affected by our environment. This all came from that moment looking out my yard. I might have come to this anyways, a different route, but that was it. And when I went down and I saw the environment that turned this guy from this quirky Sumi bird painter into these meticulous little flower things in these little vessels. Above the sink in the little kitchen in the studio were these boxes full of these cool little glass vessels that when you look at his paintings, you go, "Ah, that's that one." You know, simple. You go out into the forest where there's wildflowers and there's little things and there's big things, and you pick a few and you put them in a thing and you sit there and study it. Which reminds me of, shall I keep going?
Sure. Awesome.
I play music with some guys, and we were talking about how to kind of trust what you know. And there was something about letting go of expectations down there that wraps into different creative forms too. And you've got to trust what you know and not overthink it. But
It's sometimes sometimes I feel that, and sometimes I don't feel that. Sometimes
Yes.
it's hard to trust.
Yeah.
You're like, really? Trust that? I don't know.
Well,
sometimes
yeah.
the one part of your brain says, you know,
so you
there's
gotta
a
trust that
kind of,
voice.
kind of a dialogue. Like, I don't know if I should trust that. because,
Which shoulder are you listening
you know,
to?
but that's yeah. Well, it's just really cool to see. I've seen several of your shows, many of your shows, and you've developed this aesthetic that's just marvelous and rocking and cool.
I think so.
And this one here is just really, it's exploding with a kind of passion and beauty.
Cool. When I finished there is a version of this out there in the world somewhere now. I showed it up at Twist at Confluence Gallery, and I believe that's where it's sold. Either there or Museo. Anyway, somebody out there bought it, and I was thrilled that it found a life because I wasn't sure. You know, you just don't know if things are going to resonate with people. And you know, it might be in the big city, it might be in the bush somewhere, you just don't know. But at Confluence, they were writing about that, and I've been using their verbiage ever since. And somebody up there gave me the gift of writing that these were explosive florals. I thought, yeah, that's right where I wanted it to land, you know. Not too soft and sweet, but not so angstful that you're repelled from living with it. I mean, I do want people to live with my work. So Exploding Florals worked really good.
It's a great title or kind of a series or a theme.
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful and rugged and strong and it has sex and violence and everything in there. It's just packed in there.
That, Alan. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great.
You know, it's fun, isn't it? When we all go through voices and periods, and it's really rewarding when you hit on something that feels genuine, and it came from a genuine place, and you're not burnt out on it. You're going, yeah, I can do more of that, and that's cool, and it energizes me. So I was glad when I matured my voice, as you know, that I've got a lot of them. I've done the big sculptures, and I was going to be a drummer when I moved to Seattle, and it didn't pay very good in the club circuit, but it was a fun number of years. But I was making more money doing scrimshaw. But that ran its course big time, and so you move into different things, and watercolors and paintings, and then when Nicole and I had Rock Dement, we had space that I could exhibit bigger stuff, which was a luxury, and it allowed me to explore scale and a different voice. But say contracted, but I pulled back into the medium that I feel good about right now, and it's I've been working on this. As I feel like I'm in control of what I want it to do. So I'm in a good space that way.
It's clear. It's clear that you've really come to a really nice place.
Cool.
Well, is there anything else you want to share with us?
I think I've rambled on to a perilous edge.
Well, I've treasured every moment of it. It's
Likewise,
just been
Alan.
great to hear from the artist's mouth.
Good to see your garden and your studio and reconnect after isolation for years.
Right?
Hello, is anybody out there?
That's part of the experiment, or
Yeah.
the project to, bring my friends back, and we're still here. We haven't died yet, and we're still fighting and fighting the good fight and making art. So, well, thanks so much
that's
for
a win.
coming.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Alan.